My father's turning 100 years old has, of course, occasioned me to kind of meditate about the whole process of aging. It made me think about, for one thing, something I talked about in my book, The Complete Married with Children book, TV's Dysfunctional Family Phenomenon. And that was how Al Bundy, in his younger years, he'd been this, this young tough, this swaggering young bully. And he still wanted to be Al Bundy, king of the streets. And so he tried to round up the old gang, to go against some of the street kids. But 20 years does a lot to the old gang, and they were wheezing and overweight and out of shape and no match for young males in their prime. No match at all. Not a fair fight. And also I was reminded of Charles Manson has kind of became the boogeyman in a lot of people's minds. He, and he deliberately played with that in a lot of interviews. He would act like the gangster, this really nasty fellow, and he would, play this part. Okay. And he was doing that in an interview with, I think it was Diane Sawyer. Okay. And then they showed him an interview with one of the quote unquote Manson girls. Okay, this had been like 20 years ago in the 1970s when they'd been tried, and he and his co-defendants, 3 females associated with him, they had been called in those days the Manson girls, and they were actually, and now they're more like the Manson women or the Manson associates. And he hadn't seen her in about 20, almost 30 years. And he saw her, and the mask dropped. And he made a statement that was oddly poignant. He was asked what he thought when he saw Patricia Krenwinkel talking. He hadn't seen her since she was like 21 years old. She'd been one of his girlfriends, very close to him. And he said, "She got old on me." Because he remembered her as 21 years old, a 21-year-old, young woman who was, smitten with him and, had, long chestnut colored hair and was his, one of his girlfriends, not one of the more necessarily one of the more attractive ones, but one of the many sweethearts he had. He remembers her as 21, and he saw this wrinkled, gray-haired, heavy-set lady with bolt earrings in her ears. And he said, "She got old on me." And, of course, that reminded us of the fact that the victims, people they killed, weren't allowed to get old. They weren't allowed to get middle-aged. They were frozen because they were, their stories were ended. You know, there is that thing about the it also reminded I also started thinking about this man I used to see in Austin, Texas, who was a disabled man, quite pitiful looking. He was older too, but he was also very severely handicapped. He looked all in gray. Everything was gray. The hair was gray. The um, just the skin was gray, and the clothes were all worn out and dirty. And he walked around with a cane, shaking all the time.